if you choose to change your mind, you have within 12 months. So years ago, people actually had more flexibility and a greater time frame. So a lot of folks would actually file early, maybe 2 or 3 years later, they could change their mind, or they purposely went through this strategy to file early, take that money, maybe invest that in something. So unfortunately, Social Security now says you can change your mind, but it's within the first 12 months. So if I file today, I have until, I guess, about April of next year to change my mind. What that means is you have to contact Social Security Administration, say that you no longer want your Social Security benefit. And unfortunately, one of the kickers or qualifiers is you have to pay back any Social Security benefits you previously received. So if I was collecting $1,000 a month for, say, the past 6 months, situation changes, maybe I go back to work, or I get a different type of role and I say, gosh, I don't need the Social Security, I don't want the Social Security, contact them. I have to pay those payments back, that's $6,000 in that case, plus any interest that the Social Security Administration will assign to that. So whatever that number is, they'll notify you and say yes or no, depending on the time frame. We can undo this, but here's what's required from you. And then it's an obligation, or an agreement between you and them. The big thing I caution though is that 12 months goes by very quickly. So usually what we try and encourage folks is if you're going to do it, you probably want to stick with it, because again, knowing that you have this time frame in the back of your mind, again, unless you're the type of person that documents that or something and says, okay, this is the absolute last date that I can undo it, or if something gets hung up to Social Security Administration. So I know I've got a month from now, right? And I contact Social Security, but I don't hear back. What happens in that case? So I think that's something you just want to be aware of and just say, God, if I'm going to file, I probably should stick with it. But again, something changes in your situation, it can be undone. Yeah, I think there's a couple. I think one, is maybe a fear or a concern that Social Security is going away. So I file right at 62 because I read an article or I heard from a friend that, gosh, now's the time to do it. You got to take it. Well, if I continue to work, as we know, we talked about in the past, that benefit actually may be reduced. So the withdrawn amount or the withheld amount may be such, it may be so high that it really didn't make sense for me to file. Or maybe I retire at 62 and, get bored, or, have a dream job, or maybe find a podcast or what, life changes and careers change and my goals change. And maybe there's a new sense of purpose, and that comes with some type of employment or something, where maybe I'll go on the road and start speaking and I'm getting paid for that. So I have that opportunity now to maybe take some of that. Sorry, I lost you there. So I have the opportunity there to take some of that and maybe don't necessarily need or want the Social Security. So I think it really I think fear drives it often. I think maybe not a great understanding or maybe education as far as maybe somebody sitting down with you saying, before we do this, let's just talk about, what's our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And does it make sense to continue to take our Social Security benefit? Because you don't want to be in the bucket or in the camp that you want to stop and start a couple times, because you're only allowed to do it once. So I think, if you're going to do it, you probably should do it. If not, sit down with professionals. And I think that's where, good tax and legal or good tax and financial professionals can help you go through that process and really say, okay, it makes sense. Or if we do need to undo it, we certainly have that opportunity. I think one thing is don't let emotion drive this. I think it's a hot topic with Social Security. It's a hot button, for all of us on this video, right? We paid in the Social Security. We've entitled to Social Security. It's one of the few things where you don't know what your account value is. You don't know where your balance is. You can't take a lump sum. So you can't really touch it or feel it. And I think sometimes when there's negative publicity or there's, some noise around some type of program, we get concerned. And all we want to do is kind of get our money out, right? We want to protect ourselves. And I think that certainly is warranted. But I think that fear sometimes drives us down a path where it's really the wrong path. It's maybe not the right option for us. So I think, don't let the emotion drive it. Hopefully be more practical and have a conversation. I think the first step we always talk about is, do you need this money? What income do you need from Social Security? And if you do the math and come to find out you actually don't need Social Security, if I need, maybe $3,000 a month in retirement or whatever that number is, and I've already got those sources of income that can cover that. Well, the good news is if I don't touch my Social Security, it may grow behind the scenes. So it might be even more powerful to kind of take a step back, really do an inventory of my other sources of income, sit down with my tax professional, say, is this the most tax efficient way to take my income? It may be, gosh, maybe we start drawing down the Roth right now, or look at an IRA or 401k, or maybe you're lucky enough to have a pension, or maybe a combination thereof. So I think, one of the challenges with Social Security is it's not like a checking or savings or even an IRA or Roth IRA where I can't take a portion. I either turn it on or I don't. So it's, like a tap system, right? For water, it's either on full steam or it's not on at all. And sometimes that's not the best thing to be able to have or to be able to rely on, because you may want to slow that down a little bit. You may want to be able to turn that off and on, and it doesn't offer that same flexibility. Where some of those other sources of income, I can draw down my IRA a little bit quicker and then maybe slow it down towards the end of the year. Or I can maybe use my Roth IRA next year or 401k. So I've got more flexibility. And I think sometimes because there is that lack of flexibility, it gets people concerned. And again, they think, gosh, I've just, or kind of follow the herd mentality is probably the last one, right? Where everybody else is kind of going and filing 62. It makes sense for everybody else. Maybe it's the wrong thing for me, but if everybody else thinks it makes sense, should it be the one option for me? Where, again, I think Social Security is really an individually based type of decision, even between spouses sometimes. Seen spouses choose totally different options. So don't let those things kind of drive you. It should really be, what's the best situation? What's the best opportunity for me? Yeah, I do think it's one of those topics where you don't want to feel like you're not educated. It's one of those, Social Security, I think, is one of those things where we feel like we should know more than we actually do. And I think, when we hear from a friend or a relative, or maybe there's a pundit on TV that says, this is the best option for folks, you don't want to be in the camp that says, gosh, I didn't do it, or I'm embarrassed because I did take it early. I'm a firm believer that there's a reason that drove you to take your Social Security benefit. So you can kind of stand up and say, this is why I did it. But I also think it's one of those topics that you probably don't discuss with too many people. You're probably are a little hesitant, and maybe I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but tell me a little bit about what you did. And I think that also puts you in a better position to maybe hear why somebody chose to wait or somebody filed early. But I don't think it's something, again, we're entitled to it. We have the opportunity of doing it. So there's really no right or wrong. And I also think that's one of the drivers too, that people, a lot of seminars I do in particular, people come up to me afterwards and said, okay, good information, but what's the right age? What's that secret? There's got to be a secret age, right? There's got to be, what's the best option? Should I take it at 68? Should I wait, or maybe take it early at 63 or 64? There's really no right or wrong. I wish there was. I mean, it'd make it a lot easier, right? So I don't think don't feel embarrassed because you chose a certain option. Again, I think the opportunity, if you do feel uncomfortable, don't let embarrassment drive it. But if it doesn't make sense practically, contact someone. Contact someone and see if you can get out of it. And then more importantly, have that conversation or have multiple conversations before you do it, right? It's kind of like when you're buying a house. You don't just find the first house and you buy it. You kind of go through the process and see if it makes sense, the neighborhood, all those types of things. Think of Social Security just like any other source of income. If I choose to take it, what is going to happen? What's the situation behind it? Where does it put me a couple of years down the road? And think long term with it. Because again, years ago, people that chose Social Security, life expectancy wasn't what it is today. So they had to make maybe a 10, 15-year decision, where now we're making a 20 or 30-year decision. I think that length of time really kind of does add to the gravity of, before I do anything, let me really take a step back and say, does this make sense? Because if you make a mistake and it's a 10 or 15-year mistake, that's one thing. You certainly don't want to make a mistake, but if it's 10 or 15 years, it probably isn't the end of the world if I took it at 62 versus 64. But if it's a 20 or 30 plus year decision, that may have some real ramifications long term, taking it 62 as opposed to maybe waiting till full retirement age. So I think because of that longer duration, you really want to go through the process and sit down and say, okay, what are my options? What am I entitled to? What's going to be the best opportunity for me, for my spouse, for my family, long term as opposed to short term? I think, when you think about the opportunity to change your mind and undo this, it's within 12 months, right? But like you just mentioned, what if the form isn't printable and I can't print it out, maybe send it to them, or whatever paperwork they require me to complete, they didn't send it to me. And, the clock starts ticking, right? So I make this decision. I say, okay, I've got 12 months. But, what if things don't really come into play? Or again, I'm the type that leaves a form on my desk for a couple months, and maybe my spouse has to fill out some of this paperwork or whatever. And then more importantly, what if I spent the Social Security benefit? So if I'm collecting for 6 months, $1,000 a month, right? $6,000 total. What if that already disappeared? What if that already went to pay for bills, or I invested it in a CD and I can't get it back right away? So what does that mean? So I think sometimes people don't realize that it's great that you have an opportunity to undo and maybe get yourself in a different position from Social Security, but it does come with some ties, right? There's some strings attached, and I've got to pay myself back. Plus, it's probably a minimal interest, but that interest payment needs to be incurred as well. So to think about that and say, okay, did I take this $1,000 a month and put it in just a cash account, my checking or savings, or did I use it for something? It kind of disappeared. It, went to went to eBay, and it went to wherever, to whatever types of bills that I have or whatever. So I can undo it, but where's the money come from? And I think that a lot of times when we talk to folks about that, their mouth kind of drops a little bit and they don't realize that they have to pay themselves back. So if I collected for 6 months, went back to work, said, gosh, I don't need my Social Security benefit. If I could just stop it, that would be one thing. But I have to stop and I have to pay myself back. That's a totally different option. And I don't think a lot of people have really thought that through or really kind of gone through the process. And, as we mentioned earlier, 12 months is the max. So what if, I don't know, for some reason, I don't get the paperwork in time? I don't know if it needs to be notarized or something in my state, right? So I can't find a notary, or I'm just lazy and, a couple months go by and I'm still thinking about it. Again, the clock's ticking and it goes by very quickly. So I've always kind of been that, we don't give tax or legal advice, but I think sometimes you need to go into Social Security with the knowledge that, again, I'm probably going to keep this on. I can't get out of it, but getting out of that, is that the right position for me, or can I afford to get out of it, really is probably the bigger question.